So good evening and welcome everybody to the top 10 issues of Chanco Lodge. I hope you'll find this to be informative and educational and enjoyable. This has been a lodge that I've followed for probably, well over 60 years. And I'll explain some of the reasons why and some of the fascinations that I have with it and some of the priorities and passions that I have for this lodge. But let's start off with some history first. First, let's talk about the name itself, Chanco. This particular plaque, which is a little bit oxidized, you can't read it very well, so it's summarized at the bottom. Chanco is the name of a Native American Indian brave who lived in the area around Jamestown, actually in current Surrey County on the south side of the James River from Jamestown during colonial times. And he's said to have warned the English settlers of an impending attack in 1622, thus, at least in part, saving the colony. There was an attack. People were killed, but not everybody was killed. A fraction was killed. Several hundred people out of several thousand were killed by the Indian attack, but they were prepared and they basically repulsed the attack and the colony survived. So Chanco is held up as a hero for, at least in part, helping the colony at Jamestown survive during the early years. As far as the lodge itself is concerned, it was chartered to the Old Dominion Area Council, Suffolk, Virginia. Started off in 1952. And they had a totem. Actually, they had two totems. One was an Indian head. Originally, that was portrayed as a chief. And later on, it was portrayed as a brave. And also, they had a second totem, or a bi-totem, you might say, a deer head. The lodge lasted all the way until 1995, when it merged with Kecoughtan 463 Peninsula Council on the north side of the James River and formed the current Wahan Seneca Lodge 333 of the Colonial Virginia Council, still in existence. So the lodge existed for 43 years, and then it merged starting January 1st, 1996. A little bit of geography, map orientation about what we're talking about. The arrows here point to the Chanco territory, which, as Johnny said earlier, is right on the border between North Carolina and Virginia, right on the south side of Virginia. And it encompasses these areas noted by 483. You can see some of the other lodges and their territories. This is an old map going back to the old Area 3C. But that was when I started collecting, and that's pertinent to this story. In actual names, the counties, Suffolk at the time was Nansemond County, but they became City of Suffolk, and they went along the southern border to Southampton County, Greensville, and Brunswick. Brunswick was the end of their territory, and then they went up to the James River with Sussex County, Surrey, and Isle of Wight. So that's the territory we're talking about. Very rural. They're known for peanuts and hams. They're not urban. They're not really cities there. A few cities are very small. And one of the things I want to point out about this map is that I'm living over here in Virginia Beach, not far from Suffolk. In fact, our lodge is this Tidewater Council, which is shown here and goes down into North Carolina. And the point being that geographically, they were right next door. I mean, I live in Virginia Beach now. I also lived in Virginia Beach then. I've been in the same place the whole time. And it was interesting to me when I first started collecting that Chanco was right here, and all these other lodges were farther away, including some out of state. And I was able to see their lodge patches, but I was never able to see very many of these. And that was an observation that struck me very solidly. I wanted to try to collect some of the lodges in the early days when I didn't have very many patches. You tried to collect your own state at least. And these guys right here, 483, were hard as nails to find and hard as nails to deal with. And that was part of the challenge and part of the reason why I decided to pursue them and to make them a high priority and a high passion. So if we get to the reasons why, we already said it's small, rural, not a high population density, but also the mindset was different. We said in some of the other Zoom calls that back then, the real purpose of patches was to wear on your uniform. Well, they took that to heart. The patches that they had were for their uniform, and they were for them. They weren't for you. And the fact was that even though they may had certain restrictions on them, like one a year for ordeal, that was their flap at the time, or two a year for brotherhoods, that restriction was meaningless because they never got them anyway. They didn't want them. They didn't trade them. They didn't collect them. They were just for their uniform. Now, of course, there's exceptions, but generally speaking, the population or the scouters and scouts in that area had that mindset, and they were hard to come by and hard to find. So that's kind of the background of why I started collecting them and following them for the past 60 some years. Okay, we're getting to the top 10 list. I've decided on certain reasons or criteria of including some of these things on the list and excluding some others. I'm going to go what I think of, at least in my honest, objective opinion, is their rarity. I'm not going by necessarily their dollar value, although sometimes that does correlate and sometimes that does go with it. And I'm not going by demand, what people think of them or how much they want them, just rarity. I'm also not going to consider varieties, color shades, millimeter lengths. I'm going to consider issues only. There are varieties of a lot of these things, but I'm just going to consider issues, and that this is just my personal opinion. Other people could have other opinions, of course. And my reasons for studying this and for collecting them and for trying to learn about them for over 60 years, most of which I've already told you, but we'll maybe touch on that again. So anyway, we'll start off with number 10. And this is probably a very unconventional pick. Probably nobody would pick this. But I happen to know that this is very, very hard. Now, most of you are on mute, but I can hear you laughing. Why would John Ortt pick a hat pin that doesn't look like anything and that nobody cares about as one of the things for his top 10 list? Well, the key to this is the 30 down here by the deer head. There are many, many more of this same design, same issue without the 30. And those are so common. You see them everywhere. I think there's some on eBay all the time. You see them at Trade-O-Rees. You see them anywhere there's hat pins, and nobody thinks twice about them. They're basically nothing, couple dollars. And the laughable part is, if you ever find one of these, it's sort of in the same boat. Nobody cares about these either. And they're also just a couple dollars. But we're not talking about dollars here. We're not talking about demand. We're talking about rarity. And these with the 30 show up very, very seldom. And so they made my list at number 10. Came out in 1982, which corresponds to the 30th anniversary. The lodge started in 1952. On to number 9. This one is an event patch. It's an early event patch. In fact, it's their earliest event patch. It has to do with a pilgrimage to Jamestown in 1957. That is significant because 1957 was the date of the 350th anniversary of Jamestown, and they had an 8-month festival go on there at Jamestown in 1957 called the Jamestown Festival to celebrate the landing in 1607. Well, Chanco was a part of that. They sent a dance team over there and participated in that. And besides, they have a tie to Jamestown anyway because of the historical reference to Chanco himself warning the colonists and the settlers who were there. So this was a big event. Vice President at the time, Nixon, was there. Queen Elizabeth was there. The 3 ships portrayed are the Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery. And those were the ships that made it over from England to Jamestown. I've seen this patch on neckerchiefs and off of neckerchiefs. I've also seen this patch with different color yellow, some bright yellow, some darker yellow. I don't think that matters. The rarity is the same. It's a great patch. It shows up from time to time, but I think it's worthy of at least number 9. Okay, moving on to number 8. This patch, we're getting harder and harder in terms of rarity. This one, number 8, is the X4 odd shape, 15th anniversary, 1967, with the button loop at the top. Most of these are in good shape if you can find them. They haven't been worn or sewn on very much. And if they have any use at all, it's very slight use. There is supposedly, according to the reference books, either Blue Book or OA Insignia or Patch Vault, 2 different versions of this, also depending on the yellow color of the yellow thread. I've never been able to find one in over 60 years. They've all been the same to me. They've all come out the same yellow. So I'm sure it's true, but I have never seen one either with a darker yellow or a lighter yellow. That still makes it a very tough patch. It is much tougher than the 10th anniversary, 1962, which came out 5 years before this one did. And you can see that this one is actually much better. Also, you'll notice that the headdress now has gone to the brave instead of from the, back in the front, we showed one of these. This is the chief's headdress. And through the years, in the early 60s or late 50s, they changed that to a brave because Chanco himself was a brave. Chanco was not a chief. So I'm sure that's the reason why. Okay, on to number 7. 1957, first flap. Rolled edge. Beautiful, plain, simple, but great patch. You'll notice that this particular patch and I didn't discover this, I'm taking this off of the First Flaps book, doesn't have any designation to it to tell you that it's Order of the Arrow. It doesn't have any red arrows or any colored arrows. It doesn't have any WWWs. It doesn't have BSA. Of course, it was before BSA and fleur-de-lis were required, but it doesn't have anything except the name and the number. And I think the First Flaps book said there's only 3 First Flaps like this, the others being 251 and 501. This came in color varieties too. I have several different shades of yellow. I don't think one is any more rare or better than any other one. They're all great. They're all fine. I also want to point out this patch is in the minority of patches in the sense of it's held its value and it's going up, not down. That's not why it's rated number 7. Again, I'm keeping dollar values out of it, but just as a sidelight, it was listed in the First Flaps book as around 250, and then Dave Thomas's collection, when he sold off his first collection, it was priced at 350. The last 2 or 3 that have gone publicly have been over $400. How many First Flaps or patches in general can say that? I would say there are a few, but not many. The vast majority have stayed the same or gone down, but this one has gone up. Okay, on to number 6. This goes to 1978. It's their jacket patch with a fleur-de-lis. It replaces their early keyhole X2, which was for their neckerchief. But this one is a large size, a little bit larger than the X2. And this came out 1978. It was not a very big deal. For several years, you could find one or get them for $20 or $30. A little bit of markup over what they cost, I'm sure, but not a lot, not exorbitant. And then they evaporated. Try to find one now. These things are crazy now. There are varieties of this. They come in sort of small letter and large letter varieties of the spelling of this Chanco Lodge and the W, but they're both the same. They're both very rare. Well, one's not any better than the other. And I rarely ever come across any of these anymore. Okay, on to number 5. This is P2, pie number 2. It's a neckerchief patch. They show up on neckerchiefs and off neckerchiefs. It is a traditional Lyons Brothers rolled edge, border overlap here, beautiful embroidery, gorgeous patch. It replaced their P1, which is the same patch, same pie, except the P1 does not have the fleur-de-lis here. The P2 has the fleur-de-lis, and much better. A lot of times we think fleur-de-lis make things worse or more modern or more of them. In this case, there are many more P1s without the fleur-de-lis than there are P2s with the fleur-de-lis. One of my reasons I can speculate is that neckerchiefs maybe during this time were becoming less popular. Maybe the Chanco people that were there already had the P1s and didn't see the need for getting a P2. Remember, they were just wanted a neckerchief. They didn't want anything to trade or to sell. They just wanted a neckerchief. And if they already had a neckerchief, then this would have been superfluous. So this is about 1977 or 1978, and it is a very hard patch to find, either on or off the neckerchief. On to number 4. This guy is a killer. There's no other way to say it. This guy is a killer. It's the same as their S1, except it has a white border instead of a yellow border. And it came out 1972 for their 20th anniversary. It doesn't say 20th anniversary, but it is their 20th anniversary. And these things were tough from the very beginning. I was away at school, at college, when this event happened, and I did not get an opportunity to attend. The people that were there at that event, which was at Suwon Scout Reservation, everybody got one of those who was there. But after that, they became very, very scarce. And I'll put it this way. I got back into scouting in the later part of the 70s and knew about this, and learned about this, and tried to pursue this patch. I was at least 3 years before I finally was able to get one of these patches. And that's with trying. And that's with doing my best to trade for one, or if somebody in those days, we were starting to buy them as well as trade. They are just incredibly hard, and it'll always be one of my favorite patches. On to number 3. We're getting into real rare air now. This one is even harder to find than the 20th anniversary flap. This one is ultra terrible to try to find. One reason it came out right before they merged. And this is a computer design of the F2. They went to a different manufacturer, not Lion Brothers, and I'm sure they could get it made a little cheaper, but it's a computer design. Everything else is basically the same. They copied the same cartoon or punch pattern, and they had these made. And then right after they came out, they merged. So the same stringency, which was on the neckerchief patches for the P2, apply here, except that these were only out a year or 2 at the most. And then they were gone. These patches are so good that about 2011, somebody, I don't know who, decided to fake these. And the fake turned out to be a very good, excellent fake. It was hard to tell. When the first one came out, and these were on eBay, I was stunned. I said, golly, there's an incredible P3. The seller didn't describe it as a fake or anything, just said a Chanco patch. I said, this is incredible. And it went for several $100s. I didn't buy it, but it went for several $100s. A week or 2 later, another one came out, and I said, uh-oh, what's going on? 1 is almost impossible. 2 is incredibly, and sure enough, it is too good to be true. There turned out to be a total of, I believe, if my memory's right, 6 or 8 of these that surfaced on eBay. They were all right in a row about 2011. They all were bought at decreasing values. It became known that they were a fake, not a real one. And I ended up getting one for under $100, something like $30 or $40. And eventually they dried up and they didn't show up anymore. But there are at least 6 or 8 out there where probably somebody has them and they may think they're real, but they're not real. The real one has the horizontal crossbar of the 4 stitched in front of the vertical crossbar. The other one, the fake one, has the vertical crossbar stitched in front of the horizontal. There are other minute differences, but that's the best and easiest way to tell. The size of these things are very similar. The colors are very similar. There is a little different in the stitching, but if you have them, if you don't have them side by side, they can easily fool you, and I'm sure have fooled at least a half a dozen people who probably still have them, I would guess. However, a fake does not decrease the rarity of the real one. The real one is still just as good and rare as ever. It might decrease the dollar value a little bit. It might decrease the audience and the demand a little bit, but it doesn't decrease the rarity. And that's why I kept the real P3 at number 3. Okay, now we're getting down to the real thin air, you might say. Number 2. Number 2 is the Chanco totem pin. It dates from the 50s, 1950s. 54 and 55 is when the records of these started to show up. It's a silver one, it's a Brotherhood, and it is made by Caldwell. 5 years or more ago, this would not be in the list, not because it isn't good and because it wasn't there all the time, but because we just were not aware of it. We just didn't know. It was like a lot of other lodges. We don't know if they made a pin or not, but we can't say that they did. We can't say that they didn't, and that applies to many situations. And about 5 years ago, I came across some documents that were forwarded to me from the late Ben Vincent. And I'd had them some while, but I didn't take the trouble to read them. And I mean, they were boxes of these things, folders and folders of these things. And one night I was just reading through some of them, and they were a lot of the things that don't matter: membership lists, who paid their dues. We're going to have a camp out at Camp Waters. A lot of generic things. I finally came to this one, and this last paragraph kind of thunderstruck me. The new lodge patches are here, and they are 45 cents each. They're talking about the small keyhole, the one that I showed at the very beginning of the presentation, the X1, their first patch. Brotherhood members can get their new pins at this time for $2.50. This is the silver arrow with the deer head guard. Well, I'm into totem pins, and I can tell you that blew me away. There's nothing much better than that. Following up, a few months later, in 1955, is a very sketchy lodge inventory. They had 26 large patches. Those are the X2 large keyholes, 60 cents each. They had one Brotherhood pin left for $2.50, and it had sold. And the rest of these things are typical for lodges of that era. They had the small lodge patches, which were for their uniform, pocket, 45 cents. That's the X1. They had some sashes, both Brotherhood and Ordeal. Didn't have any vigil members at that time. They had some ceremony books, both Ordeal and Brotherhood. They had some pocket ribbons, the kind that the red and white dangles that everybody has for their button loop. And they had 29 lapel pins, which were just the plain arrow, which they have correctly identified as Ordeal. The Brotherhood pins are the ones that had the deer head guard, and that makes all the difference in the world. I forwarded this information to a friend of mine, Robert Locke. Robert Locke took this information and a lot of the boxes and folders that I'd had from the estate of the late Ben Vincent and did an exhaustive analytical study of this topic. And Robert Locke, in conjunction with me over the phone and through many emails, and in conjunction with Bill Topkus, in terms of totem pins, not so much Chanco, but in terms of totem pins, wrote a 46-page Word document. I would compare it to a master's degree thesis. And it is an incredibly detailed work. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. It is available if anybody wants to see it, but it's very laborious in terms of its composition and in terms of its reading. However, it's well worth it, and the conclusions are valid and reliable. And it turns out that we have the documentation that they had a Caldwell pin or a totem pin. We just have to find out which one they had. So it turns out there's 3 possibilities. One of the options is this image shown here. It is from Lodge 343. It's a pin that Bill Topkus has. He's the only one that has it. And it's a gold pin, and it's never shown up before or since. And the chances that Chanco used this are none or next to none. Although we've never found a Chanco pin in the Chanco area on one of their uniforms, or pictures, or any documentation, or any estate or jewelry box or anything. So we have to decide which of these things is the most likely. The second possibility or option is that they used the pin that was already available by Caldwell, and they could just order that straight off of the Caldwell brochure, which was prevalent then and also in the handbooks, the OA handbooks. They could decide, hey, that's good enough. That shows what we want to show. We'll use that as our totem pin. The third possibility, which I don't have up here, is that they could have contracted and made their own die. They could have just had one of their own made. However, the cost of that and the follow-up orders of having at least 12 or 15 as a minimum order, and then you've got to pay a $50 so die fee, that's not only likely, it's not in the mindset of how Chanco operated. That's not how they did. They did not want to spend money for things if they could help it. And the things that they did spend money for were for their uniform, were for them. So the overwhelming possibility or probability is that this pin is the Chanco pin. And that is described here. And we went back and forth through the documents. We analyzed it. We ran this through Bill Topkus to see if this made sense or if we were missing anything. He said, yep, that's correct. You can't say 100%, but you can say 99% that is correct. That would be the one that they used. And out of the options that were there, that is by far the thing that is not only the most likely, but overwhelmingly the most likely. So we're still looking for one, but I have a feeling we may have already found one. We just didn't know that it was Chanco. We probably already found one. We just didn't have the provenance. We didn't know where it was. A lot of times you find these pins, you don't know where they're from. So you assign them. Well, we already know that there were some in 17 Cuyahoga. We already know there were some in 49 Swanakee. So we'll just put it in one of those. It could be that we've already found one of these. We just didn't know it at the time that Chanco had one. We didn't have this to go by as a guideline and as a guardrail. So we probably assigned it to either 17 or 49 because those are the ones we knew at the time. So anyway, that's number 2. Finally, we get down to the last one. And this one is my favorite patch. This one is the Chanco chenille. It's a prototype. Came out in 1993. It was ordered by the lodge. In other words, it went through the proper channels. Here's the paperwork from the Standard Pennant Company. And at that time, DeWitt Holland was representing the lodge. And this specifies what they wanted. This is the Standard Pennant Company receipt. And sure enough, they made this. Standard Pennant Company made this, sent it in to the lodge by way of DeWitt Holland. DeWitt Holland received it, took the patch and the data to the lodge and the executive committee, and the lodge decided not to get it. This again goes back to their mindset. It wasn't because they didn't like it. It wasn't because it wasn't pretty enough or it didn't do well enough. The reason they turned this down was because it cost $30. At the time, they thought $30 was too much to ask the members to pay. They turned it down. Now, not only did they turn it down, they didn't come up with any alternatives. They didn't say, but instead we'd like to do this, or we'd like something else, or we'd like to go to a different manufacturer, maybe that was cheaper. No, they just took it off the table. They said, no, we don't want it. Sorry. Well, this entire story is documented by Glenn Chase, who has a terrific website on Kecoughtan items. And one section of the Kecoughtan website, which he's done, is on Chanco's and Old Dominion Area Council. And if you look through there, he's got one article on the elusive Chanco chenille prototype, which is basically what I've just described to you, how they ordered it, how it went through DeWitt Holland, how they rejected it. And then about 2010, I saw on a sales list the Chanco YC1 offered. It was a mail list. It wasn't public. It was just a mail list. And I said, good grief. I didn't know that DeWitt got rid of the prototype, but I want it for sure. So to make a long story short, I ended up buying this prototype. What I did not know is that it was not DeWitt Holland's original prototype. There was a second one. And this article here, the second article by Glenn Chase, describes that. The second Chanco YC1 chenille prototype surfaces. Well, that's the one that I have. And I got it. I was happy about it. It turns out I called Dwight up after I received this. I said, Dwight, have you still got your Chanco prototype? He said, yeah, I got it. I said, well, I got one too. And of course, he was stunned. It turns out that part of the policy, or you might say philosophy or business operation of Standard Pennant Company, is to make a sample whenever they make a patch. This is the sample. So it all makes sense. They didn't really make more. They didn't really have somebody copy them. It's not a fake. It's not anything. It's just a sample, but it is made by the same company. It has the same label on the back. It has the same code numbers, which identify the maker of it and all that stuff. So turns out there's two of them. And Glenn Chase describes that. So I'll put a footnote in on this. Just I know I'm about out of time, but I'm nearing the end. I think you'll enjoy this. So I had my chenille, and I knew that DeWitt had his chenille, and DeWitt decided a few years ago that he wanted to get rid of his chenille, of course, at a high price. And I already had it, but I knew that it was good. Maybe I should have another one. Maybe I should get both of them. There's a concept that comes in here called population density. And Bill Topkus told me about this. It's a way of conceptualizing it. Jeff Morley, I'm sure, knows about this. If you have 5 patches that are known and they're with 5 different people, that's a low population density of that patch. If you have 5 patches known and all 5 of them are with one person, that's a high population density. It seemed to me that a high population density is not as healthy for the hobby as a low population density. What was I going to do with 2 of them, except maybe move it on to somebody, which I would try to do, I think. Anyway, I didn't want to go through that. And DeWitt was having trouble selling his, believe it or not. I said, well, somebody should really want this. And I knew that Joe Malloy was the king of chenilles. At that time, Joe was alive. And I contacted Joe and I said, I don't know if you're interested in this one. It's a prototype. It's not a real issue, but if you do, it's available and you should get it. And he thought about it a while, and I said, and we went back and forth, and Dwight was still having trouble selling this over the course of about a month or 2. I got back with Joe Malloy again, and I phrased it this way: Joe, I don't know if you're on the fence about this or not, or if you're dabbling about the price or whatever. It's not my business, none of my business, but I'll tell you this much. If I didn't already have one, you'd never get this one. And I wasn't trying to be bragging or anything. I said, if I didn't have one, you'd never get this one. Soon after that, he bought it. And so Joe Malloy got the first original Chanco chenille. When Joe died, that collection went to Roger Ward for his dispersal, for his estate, for Marlene, and for his family. And it ended up at a Virginia Beach Trade-O-Ree and was purchased by Larry Johnson. So the now owner, the current owner, is Larry Johnson up in Gloucester, Virginia. I'm happy. It has a good owner. It has a great owner. And he has the patch, and it will be, and he's part of Wahad Seneca Lodge, which of course took over Chanco, merged with Chanco from Peninsula Council, Kecoughtan. And so it ends up to be a very happy story. Those are the 2 chenille patches where they are now, one with me and one with Larry Johnson. So sorry if that was a long-winded story, but I thought it was a good, fun story. So here's my summary. Just to recap, the chenille can't be beat, the Caldwell pin, and all these others are in order. I realize some of these, some people might not even consider collectible. That's okay with me. You may choose not to even consider some of these things as being worthwhile. But in terms of rarity, I'm pretty sure these are fairly accurate. These are rare as rare can be. And if anybody has any of these, I'm interested. If anybody has any extra of these, I'm interested. Now, that's not true for all Chancos, but for these 10, if anybody has any, I'm interested. So a tip of the hat to many people who were behind this. The Blue Book, of course, is unsurpassed in its usability. I'd be remiss not to mention that. The first flaps in color, I've already mentioned that a couple of times here when I was talking about the Chanco F1. That is great. The pictures on OA images and OA insignia now, the current ones are great. Patch Vault, I use that. They're the ones that actually have the listings of the hat pins. They've gone into that, so that relates to the hat pins. The Robert Locke document is just a intense analytical study, which proved to be very worthwhile and very reliable. And finally, the last one is the website by Glenn Chase, which describes the chenilles, both the first one and the second one. So that's the end. And as the first slide showed the first patch of Chanco, the X1 small keyhole, this shows the last patches. These were the end of the line for Chanco. 3 event patches in 1995. Here is Chanco receiving the information, actually an invitation or an entreaty to join in the raid. Chanco is an Indian, even though he was living with the white settlers and was adopted by them. He was an Indian by blood, and the Indians thought that he would really be on their side. It turns out that he felt loyalty to the settlers. This is him telling his, you might say, stepfather, Richard Pace, about the impending attack. And the last patch is crossing the James River from Surrey County over to Jamestown and informing the settlers of the impending attack coming the next day, which they effectively repulsed and saved Jamestown. So that's the end of the story, and that's the end of the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you very much.